Hi, everyone. So we're back again with another episode. Stefano Virgilli and myself in Malaysia, but in our own respective locations because of COVID. And our guest today is Don Einhorn. He is in France, and he is a very established guest, I have to say. Stefano and Dom met online somewhere, but also actually met in person some years back. Serendipity, huh? Dom is a very established entrepreneur with many startups under his belt, investor as well, and is involved in the nurturing and incubation side, which is actually what we're going to talk about today. So let's start by, Dom, why don't you tell us a bit more about Uniqorn and also your last name and how it relates to Uniqorn?
Thank you, Diane. Thank you for having me, Stefano, as well. Yeah, my last name, Einhorn, means unicorn in German. So when I go to a tech conference in Germany, usually the first thing people ask me is when I changed my last name. So that's pretty interesting. But growing up, it wasn't such a fun name because everybody would mispronounce it. So, you know, I actually hated my last name when I grew up. Now it's a little bit more popular.
What would they call you? What do you mix up with?
Well, in France, they pronounce it énorme, which means enormous, which is not necessarily a good connotation.
Oh.
And depending on which countries you go to, it's completely being butchered. So, you know,
no.
At one point in time, I felt like changing my last name, but now it's a popular name, so I keep it.
That's good.
So yeah, I'm half French, half German. I'm calling in from the southwest of France in a small town called Sarlat. That's Sarlat, for those of you who want to Google it. It's a medieval town that dates back to the 9th and 10th century. In fact, if you go 200 meters behind me downtown, that's where the movie Joan of Arc was filmed, a Luc Besson movie. And when they filmed it, the only thing they did was take out the cars of the city and they started shooting. Everything else looks the same as it did 1,000 years ago.
Oh, so it's beautiful.
Yeah, so you'd think it's an interesting location from which to launch a startup. When we first came here, and we did launch in March of 2018, I spent 25 years in the US prior to that. And we were the talk of the town, small town, so it's easy to be the talk of the town when we first came here. People were wondering what we're trying to do, you know. So they call me the American, even though I'm Alsatian, I'm half French, half German, because it couldn't relate to what was happening. You know, we went from 2 or 3 people just kind of like feeling out the terrain to over 30 people today from 18 different countries. And so we're kind of like, still are, to a certain extent, the novelty factor. We're in the process of expanding into roughly 3,000 meters of space, new space, with the intent being to bring upwards of 50 startups under our belt within the next 12 to 18 months. As it stands, we have 11, of which 7 are on location and 4 remote, primarily due to COVID. So out of the 4, 3 will move to Sarlat once COVID is over, and one of them will stay back primarily for logistical reasons of the business they're in. The idea from the get-go for us was to actually offer startup entrepreneurs with a concrete alternative to metropolitan life, away from smog, away from noise. Stefano knows something about that one, since we had a little noise problem earlier. You know, and be able to actually raise a family, be able to go river rafting in the afternoon if you like to do so, and live in the midst of pristine nature, which in my opinion, any startup entrepreneur today, if we really believe in the power of the internet, we should be able to do that if we decide to do so. So when we first did our market research in 2017, we noticed that roughly 12% of young startup entrepreneurs were willing to move away from a big city into a smaller area. 12% to me seemed like a huge number. I expected a lot less at that point in time. I expected 3 or 4%, because obviously young people tend to like cities better than rural areas. And lo and behold, COVID hit. And today that number went from 12% to roughly 38%. Today we're contacted every day by, on the low end, 30, and the high end, 100 people from around the world, including people in France, in secondary cities, not just Paris, saying, get me out of here. What can you do for me? I don't want to live in a city anymore. So that's how we came about. Aside from meeting Stefano, I don't remember. I thought I met him in Thought it was Berlin, but he said it wasn't Berlin. Then I thought it was maybe London fintech at one point in time, but we did meet. Or I wouldn't have had this card in my pocket.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting the fact that my neighbors are renovating. So every now and then I will cut my microphone just to suppress the sound, especially when they are drilling and hammering. I kind of relate to your scenario. I also come from a very old town in Italy, 9,000 people. We have our fair every year, and this year I think was the 536 years consecutive arranging that fair. So I kind of relate the type of novelty that it will be if I go back to Italy. I've been out for now 14 years, 15 years. This is my 15 years abroad. If I go back to Italy and I go back to my town and set up an incubator, probably made the headlines of the small town for sure. I remember making the headline when I left to Singapore, and back then in 2006, Singapore was not even on the map. They were asking me if I was going to China or to Japan. To them was exactly the same thing. But now Singapore has become a hub for startups, and that's one of the questions actually that I wanted to ask you. Long experience in the US for you. Long experience in Europe, long experience in Asia. I come from Africa. I lived in the Middle East as well. And I read that over 16,000 startups have left California to Texas over the past 12 months. What's going on? Where are, and also you say this number from 12 to 38% change of location of startups is no longer need to be right in the middle of the spotlight. So what's going on, and what do you foresee over the next few years in the startup scenes?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think you have two parallel trends that are ongoing. I think the US trend that you're seeing, for example, with startups leaving Silicon Valley to a place like Texas is primarily driven by pure taxation, with most Americans being more sensitive to taxation than us Europeans or Asians, I'm assuming on the Asian side. But for us Europeans, we're accustomed to paying higher taxes and we pretty much live with it. In the US, I've learned that that is not the case because I spent a quarter century of my life there. So California and New York are two of the highest tax states. Texas is one of 7 states in the US that doesn't charge any corporate income tax. It's a flat zero on the corporate income tax side. So you still pay federal income tax, but you do not pay any state tax, which is one of the primary reasons why they're moving away and going to Texas. I lived in Texas myself. I love the state. It's a great state, especially a city like Austin. 1.5 to 2 million people now in Austin, and pretty much a tech epicenter in the US, and probably will be aggressively positioning itself to draft more talent from high tax states into the Lone Star State. I think what we're seeing in Europe and other parts of the world is a different trend. And that's a trend away from clogged arteries of big cities, big metropolitan areas, away to places where historically you could not launch a technology business. So if I had imagined 20 years ago creating a technology business here in Sao Paulo, it would have been absolutely impossible. The infrastructure just wasn't there. And then to be able to convince talent to come to the city, because this city, like yours in Italy, has 9,000 souls in the winter, but it has 2.5 million tourists in the summer. So it tends to get very active. It's already very diverse, at least for half the year. But it would have been impossible as well to bring young, talented engineers and non-engineers to this town, where today they're actually looking for us. The trend has reversed in terms of people fleeing small towns to go to the big cities, where now, and in particular because of COVID now, which has been a great accelerator, the trend is really reversed, where we're seeing, again, we're contacted every single day by dozens of people that cannot wait to get away from the big cities, and are asking us, what is life like in Sala? What do you do? What can you offer me? What am I going to be missing from the big city, right? I said, well, don't look at it from that perspective. Look at what you're going to be gaining. So if we take one example, two of my engineers here at Uniqorn, they're Panamanian. I had an office in Panama between 2006 and 2009, and they were commuting for 3 to 4 hours every single day to and from the office. Today in France, they walk to the office 5 minutes, they drop off the kids to school, and they pick them up on the way home, right? Leap of productivity, leap in quality of life. One of them lost 30 pounds just because now he's actually walking. In Panama, if you walk, you have to be fear for your life, right? You cannot cross the street. So that's not the case here. So he doesn't even realize what's happening. I think what we're missing, myself included, because when I was in my 20s, I moved to Los Angeles and I was working 18-hour days just building my startup. And I didn't pay attention to my health because I figured, I'm young. I'm going to be young forever. My health is going to be with me forever. And I realized, after spending 20, 25 years there, oh my God, I'm still in this rat race. What on earth am I doing, right? I think it's time to take a step back and question myself, question some of the decisions that I've made, and there has to be a better way. Why would I have to get up at 4:30 in the morning to drive for 15 miles? Because if I get up at 5:30, I'm going to spend 3 hours on the freeway, right? There's got to be a way, be the better way, and clearly we found it.
Thanks, Dom. I actually had a question about, the real motivation behind Uniqorn, and about, your life, your journey. You were in the startup scene for a very long time. You are still in the startup scene for a very long time, and in the US, and worked really hard. And then was there I know you sort of gave an overview, but was there a turning point or some incident, something that happened that made you feel it's time, I want to go back to France, and I want to go to the southwest of France specifically, and bring this work-life balance to everybody else in the scene as well?
I can probably pinpoint with surgical accuracy what that turning point was. Where the last straw that broke the camel's back. So I was living in Los Angeles. For those of you who know Los Angeles County, south of Los Angeles, you have Orange County, city of Newport Beach, Huntington Beach, etc., all the way down to San Diego. So at a business meeting close to San Diego, which on a decent day will take you 2 to 2.5 hours to drive back up to Los Angeles. And there was an accident on the freeway. And I felt like I get back the next day. Right, I was stuck, not going anywhere for hours on end, and then it was slowly moving. I think I got home at 3 or 4 in the morning, just to do the same thing. And at that point in time, I said, you know what? I'm just not going to put up with this anymore, because what it did is it took an incident that I was living almost on a day-to-day basis, and it just amplified it to a point where I finally had the time to reset my brain because I couldn't do anything else, right? Yeah. Aside from illegally checking my emails during in traffic and my messages, but it just drove home in my mind. This is it. I'm just no longer going to put up with this. I'm going to do something else. And that was the turning point. Wow,
that traffic point that you brought up about earlier before this story about how traveling back and forth, that was actually that was it. That was a serious note about the traffic. Okay, I can totally relate to that, by the way. I mean, coming from the startup scene as well, and living in the US, and then mostly living in cities where, London, Chicago, even Nairobi and KL, Malaysia here. So
Nairobi has a nice share of traffic, that's for sure.
Yeah. Stefano, did you have more questions for Dom?
Yeah, sure. One of the questions that I have, very practical. The startups that you have now under the umbrella of Uniqorn, they are all French, or they are from abroad as well?
No, actually, we have one single French one. They're all international. So we're roughly inside a Uniqorn. The core team consists of roughly 30 people from 18 different countries, and primarily female, which is pretty rare in the tech startup scene as well. And I don't want to discuss diversity because it's a politically sensitive topic, but I'm not a believer in diversity having to be dictated to us, because anything that is dictated to us, we tend to shy away from, and we tend to do the opposite. For us, it just happened this way, right? We were looking for great talent, both on the startup side, both on the people that work inside of Uniqorn, and we just found, people from all over the world. Usually what I tell people is that no matter how strong you are inside, no matter how smart your people are inside of your organization, there's always someone smarter outside, right? And that's basically what we found. So we're completely open door policy. I don't care if you're from Mars, you can find a place here if you're qualified.
That's great. How would these people qualify?
So you're talking about the employees, the staff, or you're talking about the startups?
Oh, I'm talking about the startups. Were you talking about the staff?
It's both, in fact.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's just as diverse in the startup side as on the staff side. In terms of startups, we have a pretty strong internal filter where, when we do our diligence, my partner for over 20 years is a CFA, certified financial analyst. He worked on Wall Street for over 20 years. So he looks at
He's also in Sarlat now?
Yeah, he's slowly moving to Sarlat. He's actually in Colombia right now, stuck there because of COVID.
Oh, okay.
So he went from the Philippines, stuck there for a while, to Brazil, stuck there for a while, and now Colombia. So he's slowly moving, very slowly moving, making his way up.
Okay.
But once it checks out from his side, he obviously knows what I'm looking for as well. So he kind of like does the triage for the first candidates. From my perspective, because I'm a marketer by trade, the first thing I look at is how quickly we can add value to a deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's really the first question I ask. Number one, can we add value? Yes or no? And number two, how quickly can we take that startup from its current baseline to a scale up, ideally? And that's primarily where we come in on the customer acquisition side, on the marketing side, on the branding side. That's probably where our biggest strengths lie.
Can you share with us the sectors of your startups incubated?
Yeah, so right now, the main sectors are AI, AR/VR, fintech, digital media, and because we're in a rural area, we're slowly moving into agri-tech as well. But it's a very slow move because it's not an area that I know very well. So I'm still trying to identify talent that I can bring in-house that can actually do the right type of triage.
The agri-tech, does it include wine?
Actually, we're in France here, so we have a specific term for that. We have wine tech, and it's funny you mentioned wine tech because it's actually one of our we're active in the space. We have one, soon two startups in the wine tech industry. One company is called Palate Club, P-A-L-A-T-E, and they've devised an AI for wine. Basically, you download their app. They will send you blind samples, 3 little bottles of wine. You rate them via the app. After 3 or 4 runs like this, they read your palate. So they know they will send you a more and more customized selection of wine that specifically caters to your palate because none of our palates are alike. The other startup is in Bordeaux, obviously in one of the premier wine regions in the world. They're called Lex Lingua, and they basically apply AR to a wine, where you take your device, you hold it against the label of the wine, and it reads you the whole story about the vineyard, and the founder of the vineyard comes up and speaks to you about the wine, what makes it so special.
Wow. Yeah, okay. So bringing like customizing taste and as well as bringing the whole experience of the background, the history of the wine.
It's a big deal on the customization because most people who like wine, they just don't know what they should be drinking.
Yeah.
Right. And in the wine space, one size never fits all. It's the opposite, right? You could be loving a bottle of wine and I would hate it, for example, right? Or vice versa. That's how different our palates are.
Dom, I have to warn you not to make any claim about best wine in the world when you're talking to an Italian. Thank you.
I'm talking about wines on an agnostic basis, no matter where they come from, because I'm a big fan of Argentinian ones as well, and Italian.
I think actually it's a very interesting business model, the idea of blind sampling, and perhaps it could be expanded also to not only to other geography, but also to other fields of food and beverage. What do you think?
It could be 100%. Actually, their next
out loud, it could be wine, or it could be even some cheese, for instance.
Well, cheese is the next area they want to get into, obviously, because the wine and cheese pairing makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then the business model will be like a box, subscription box every month sent.
Very much like Razor of the Month. Very much so. Yes, it's auto ship till cancel.
Would you like to promote this startup and tell us where to find it, the website?
Yeah, for those of you who are interested in that, the founder of the startup is actually, like me, half French, half German, but it's reversed. His mom is German, his father is French, and he's in San Francisco. Company is called Palate Club, P-A-L-A-T-E Club.com.
Cool. And how, so speaking of the startups that you're incubating, how and where did you find them? Or more so, how did they find you?
There's two primary ways. We have a very strong network that I personally built for the last 25 years with primarily investment bankers around the world, in the US and in Canada in particular, and some in the UK. So we get deal flow on a regular basis. And it's great deal flow because in some cases, their condition of investment is for these startups to work with us, right? So we've built a great relationship, and I get calls once, twice a week from an investment banker. I have this deal. You want to take a look at it? And they look for validation first and foremost. And if I say, well, I think you're onto something, or I say, stay away, sometimes they don't take that advice and they go away. They do it anyway. And they call me back 6 months ago and said, well, if I only had listened to you. But in most cases, they're kind of like being hand delivered to us. And if we like it, if it checks out, they just integrate Uniqorn. So it's very seamless. And then now that we're getting larger and that we're expanding, we basically have, on a bad day, 30, on a good day, 80 to 100 startups that are contacting us on LinkedIn.
Wow.
Primary way of contacting. And then obviously easy to do the triage. Some people will just blindly send you a deck without a note with it. Some people will call me John, even though my name is Dom. That's an instant delete. Bad cut and paste. You can do the triage pretty quickly on those. And hey, I may be missing out on the next Airbnb. Who knows? But I really don't care. If you call me John, I want nothing to do with you.
Yeah, especially if you're getting so many applicants each day. Makes sense. Stefano, you have any questions?
Yeah, a question that probably answers itself. I was wondering if language has been a problem at any point in time in the journey for any of the incubated startup.
It's becoming less and less of a problem. Here, most people that come here, the language in the office, even though we're in France, it's almost like a blasphemy where it's definitely English, right? Which, how proud French people are about their own language. But most people speak 2, 3, 4, 5 languages, right? So you hear every single language here in the office. But when we speak amongst each other, it's usually English. Or French if we're just around a group of French speakers, or German, right? So switch around. My personal upbringing, we're sitting at a dinner table speaking in 3 or 4 languages about the same topic, but addressing a different person in that language, right? It's just normal. Makes it easier to multitask later in life, I guess. But language has not been slowing us down.
That's very interesting, because I was thinking of which could be considered the capital city of startups in Europe. And of course, first city that comes to mind was London, when it was part of Europe. Now probably won't, or maybe will, I'm not sure. I would like to hear your opinion on that. And then, of course, Berlin, and then Paris, maybe Milan, perhaps somewhere in Spain as well. What are your thoughts on the upcoming? Oh, by the way, I heard good things about some former Yugoslavian republics. Oh, yeah. So what's your opinion on where is the direction of the startups going?
Yeah, so you mentioned former Yugoslavia. Start with that. So we have a small office in Skopje, Macedonia. Great engineering talent, beautiful town. It's the town that has probably 150 statues of Alexander the Great. That's the big joke over there. No matter where you go, you have Alexander the Great looking over you.
So much that they were actually asked and forced to change the name of the country to Northern Macedonia now, right?
By the Greek, yeah. It's a very touchy, very sensitive topic. 2 million people, very small country, right? But a lot of talent on the engineering side. I think probably similar to that, Croatia next door. But to go to your question, I think London is probably still the big boy when it comes to startups, primarily because of the financial sector being very developed, ease of access to financing, even though the city is atrociously expensive from every level. If you're a young startup entrepreneur, I personally wouldn't recommend that you go to London to launch. Especially if you're going on a shoestring budget, because you'll be out of business within 3 months. That's how expensive it is. I think what we're seeing now is, rather than seeing cities branding themselves as the startup city, they're becoming more themed. So for example, Rennes in Normandy is now theming itself as the cybersecurity capital of France, right? Which is very interesting because I think it's actually from a marketing perspective very smart, because there are so many cities now, as you mentioned, London, Paris, Toulouse, where you have Airbus, Milan, Barcelona, Madrid, Malaga in the south of Spain, et cetera. They're branding themselves openly as tech. I think that the tech label is no longer going to be defensible going forward from a pure marketing perspective, that cities will need to specialize. So you see some cities also becoming more agri-tech focused. London, clearly fintech, right? And I think that's probably going to stick with them in the fintech space. And then what you're seeing also, Berlin, for example, more and more AR, VR, right? Others, more digital media. I'm thinking about Barcelona right there. And new labels popping up all the time. Because if you're talking about tech today, I mean, tech is pervasive and every industry has basically been consumed by tech. And if you're not in tech or working with tech, you're pretty much out of business. And I think that's, you're going to see this trend continue and become stronger and stronger, where cities, big and small, are going to try to latch on to a specific label, because it becomes a defining mark for themselves that helps them stand out from the crowd.
Very interesting. And probably I can relate also to the fact that branding can be, branding according to one specific branch of startups can be great and certainly render a great service to Singapore. That became, I would say, the fintech hub for startups in probably in Asia. I think the largest fintech event in the world is organized by the Monetary Authority of Singapore. It's very large. This year, actually, they did it online. Last year, they did it online in multiple continents as well. But in a way, it could be a double-edged sword, because for those startups that are working, for instance, in e-commerce, they try to open a headquarter in Singapore, then they realized that a massive market was in Thailand, in Indonesia, or in the Philippines, or in Malaysia itself, just simply for a matter of the population. And so some of them, they just give it a try in Singapore, maybe they keep a registered office in Singapore, but then they move all the operation to Indonesia, to Jakarta specifically, because Jakarta alone is, what, four times bigger than Singapore. And so there is interest in following, or it could be the case, for instance, for Malaysia with agri-tech, or with other areas of Islamic banking, for instance. It could be another branding of a region. And very interesting what you're saying about the de-urbanization of startups looking for smaller areas. For instance, Diane lives in Kuala Lumpur, in the capital of Malaysia. I'm a 3.5 hours drive from her in the south on the shores of Johor. Because it doesn't matter now where we are, frankly, after COVID. It was already, probably we all knew that we could have lived anywhere we want, but with COVID, we were just forced to do so. And so we can pick and choose wherever we want to be. I had the chance to go to Maribor in Slovenia and find a fantastic startup community. They have Podium, which is one of the longest standing startup events in the world, and is in Slovenia. And so what do you think about the consideration that you've done just now for Europe, if you project them into Asia or into the US or in Africa as well?
I think one thing that you mentioned that struck a chord with me is, the effect of COVID. I think if we looked at COVID, if COVID had been around for only 2 months, we would have snapped right back to our old habits. But now COVID's been around for, seems like an eternity, but about a year, I'd say. And what it's done, it's completely rewired our brains, right? We've actually changed our habits as a result of COVID. So I think that's becoming a mega trend that will be with us for years to come. And it's actually, I'm expecting a huge leap in productivity and efficiency coming out of COVID as a result of that. For example, my parents who are in their 80s, they had never used a tool like Zoom before. They were afraid of that technology. But as a result of not having a choice, they now had to force themselves to do something very uncomfortable, which is to embrace the technology. Now they're discovering it's like a boost of confidence. Oh, I can actually do this. And now I'm going to do it all the time. I have older clients in their 60s and 70s who used to travel back and forth once a week from Los Angeles to New York or vice versa, who are saying, I'll never do that again. I'll fly to New York once every 6 months now instead of every single week. I didn't know I could do this online. This is amazing, right? And I can do it instantly. So obviously lesser impact on the environment, it's eco-friendly, but the leap in productivity I think we're going to see coming out of this is that now the entire world population that's connected to the cloud is using those types of efficiency tools when before they didn't necessarily do that. So I think what that will do is will further accelerate the deurbanization process, where people in smaller areas, in smaller cities, in villages realize, you know what, I can do this from here. I don't have to go to the big city.
Yeah, I can relate to that too, that, you know, such perfect timing for Uniqorn because of the, not just the embracing of technology, but also the higher appreciation for life in general in regards to work-life balance. What plans do you have for the future, Don?
Well, the biggest plans that we have is to make what we basically did for ourselves and make it available for a larger amount, right? So the size, I wouldn't go by size of addressable market because it's just exploded. I would hope that people take our lead on what we've been doing. I'm hoping that Stefano is going to go back to Italy, to his little town for 9,000 people and replicate what we've done here for Uniqorn and do it with him. Maybe we can open up a Uniqorn branch or call it something else. Call it Virgilli, etc. in Italy, because I think that is a mega trend. I think, you know, with cities being so congested, contributing to, you know, to a large part to negatively impacting our environments, I think it would be a breath of fresh air if we could replicate what we're doing in other smaller locations who desperately need it. In France, you have 36,000 what we call communes, which are smaller groups of villages and cities. They're all suffering because in the 70s and the 80s, you had this huge drain into the big cities because that's where the jobs were, right? Today, we have this unbelievable opportunity to bring the jobs back to where they belong, back home, right? So if you're like I am in your 50s and you're like, wow, man, I'd never believed that. I can actually go back home and actually have this impact on my community, right? Think about how powerful that is and how driven you will be to actually make that happen, while at the same time allowing a tremendous amount of people to do the same thing, enjoy life and have what you mentioned, Diane, work-life balance, which most people don't do, especially in the hectic space that we're in.
Yeah, I love that. I love your life's motto and what Uniqorn stands for. Stefano, do you have any other questions for Dom?
No, just reflecting on the fact I remember attending a conference, and I think it was a good 10 years ago, so far before COVID, and there was a sociologist that was talking about the trends of mobility, and it was analyzing how in Italy we had a first sort of migration from south to north for productivity purpose, and then he went from the mountains, everyone went down. In Italy has a lot of mountains, have over 1,000 kilometers of mountains. From the mountains, everyone went down to the cities. And when the cities were too congested, there was a first step of deurbanization when they started going to they call it the area, the Piedemontana, is at the beginning of the mountains or the hills. And we have a lot of corporations, large organization or famous organization that are exactly at that stage. Think of Ferrari, think of Lamborghini. Modena were just a suburb of Bologna. Bologna was the big city, but then they started shifting out. And 10 years ago at this conference, I heard say the next stage will be to go back to the root, go back to the mountains. And it's happening actually. There is no need to run away from your birthplace anymore, which is very, very attractive to me.
It's happening so fast that even an Italian startup, which I forgot to mention, is moving to Sala right now. They're called Crowdy, Crowdy.eu. It's a special algorithm for crowdfunding platforms. And some very smart Italian PhDs, and they will be in Sala, right? Because they're looking for that kind of thing, and apparently they can't find it in Italy, not yet. So you have to go back to Italy as soon as possible.
I'll go back to my town, set up Virgilli, and start bringing French startups to Italy. So
exactly.
talking about fighting in a friendly and friendly competitive way. Do you want to say something about the Super Cup?
I'd love to. So, in an effort to brand our little town as a destination for startups, we're launching the Startup Supercup in October. It's the weekend of October 1, 2, and 3, 2021. It will take place right here in Salat. That's SARLAT, startupsupercup.com. There will be roughly 1,000 investors, primarily angel investors, and about 80 funds. Financial media will be here in force. All the major names of the financial media and the startup media will be here. And it will basically pitch 120 startups against each other who will be competing for a number of prizes, including the grand prize amongst, aside from a unicorn incubation package, they will also take home, you're going to love this, a chainsaw carved unicorn. And the artist that's carving it was a dual world champion in chainsaw sculpture. So it's a wooden unicorn that he will be doing on the spot. And but it looks absolutely amazing, better than any sculpture you've ever seen. He's extremely skilled. So it's startupsupercup.com, October 1, 2, and 3.
Wow, that's unique, huh? You won't get this anywhere else. It's even more than money that you need.
But there is not going to be any football, right, at the Super Cup?
Rugby on Sunday. So I'm the largest shareholder of the local rugby team. So for those of you who don't know rugby and listening in the US, think American football without the pads. Real man's game. So we'll have a game on Sunday, October 3rd in the afternoon, and we're hoping to get a large draw to the rugby team there.
Wow, that's great. Don, thank you so much for your time. This was such a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you,
All
Don.
the best.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.